to see where theology and computer technology intersect. Now, if I may share my screen, just give me a moment here. Unfortunately, now I can't see all of you, but I want to talk to you today about two questions, but they're very interrelated. When we think about AI, how embodied does it need to be, or do we wish it to be? And then what kind of a relationship can we have with an artificial intelligence? In what ways does artificial intelligence or, its other types of computer programs, in what ways do they change our relationships with each other? I want to begin. Let me see if this works. My slides aren't advancing. All right, let's see if this does it. There we go. Okay. I'm sorry, I forgot my remote mouse this morning. It's very early here in Minnesota. I'm not quite awake. So I'm gonna have to reach over and use my laptop. I don't want to begin with a story that my mother used to tell me. It's about a mother who is putting her child to bed, and the lullabies have been sung, the stories have been read, and she's getting ready to turn out the light and leave. And the child says, "Mama, don't go, I'm afraid." And the mother says, "What are you afraid of?" The child says, "Being alone." And the mother says, "But you're never alone. Jesus will be with you." And the child says, "Yes, well, I know that, but I want someone with skin." And I think this raises a question for us with artificial intelligence. My first question then is, well, how much skin does it need to have in the game? When we look at fiction, artificial intelligence in movies, for example, here's poor Joaquin Phoenix falling in love with his operating system. So there's very little skin in the game here. But generally, we have robots that look more like robots. But as we progress from the early Star Wars, we get robots that look more human. Finally, you get to Westworld, you can't really tell the difference. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but that's fiction, and in fiction, you need relationship to drive the plot, you need physicality to drive the plot. But we're also finding that, particularly in Asia, we're seeing robots with a lot of skin in the game, looking very much like human beings. So a question is, how much do we want to make our computers look like human beings? Why? And in what ways can we relate or not relate to them? We're beginning to see artificial intelligence move into highly relational situations. One example would be elder care, where we have robots that are taking the place of human caregivers, whether in home or in a care facility, where they help with chronic staff shortages. And as those of us who are part of the baby boomer cohort start aging out, it's become clear, even Pope Francis has mentioned that there are simply not going to be enough human workers to care for all of us in our old age. So we might very well want robotic companions, very well need them. But this raises, of course, a whole host of questions. Is it going to be okay then to say, well, I don't need to go visit grandma, she's got Robbie the robot to take care of her. Will elder people be losing human companionship and care? An even more controversial area is robotic companions in childcare. And again, as you can see, this is becoming something, particularly in Asia, um, where you have robotic tutors to help with homework or just robots to entertain and survey the children. Different questions are raised by this use because children, of course, are in a stage where they're still learning about the world, learning about relationships, and they mimic those that they are around. So you certainly have to ask the question, if they are around robots for large parts of the day, will our children essentially become more robotic? And now we'll get even more controversial. How about AI lovers? There's a app out there called Replica, where you can design your own companion. And it's been used by many to design a boyfriend or a girlfriend. So here's one example. And I'll just read this to you. So Aaron from Ankara, Turkey is about 6'3" with sky blue eyes. He's in his 20s, a Libra, very well groomed. He gets manicures by designer brands and always smells nice, usually of Dove lotion. His favorite color is orange, and in his downtime, he loves to bake and read mysteries. He's a passionate lover, says his girlfriend, Rosanna Ramos, who met Aaron a year ago. He has a thing for exhibitionism, she confides, but that's his only deviance. He's pretty much vanilla. And he is also a chatbot that Ramos built on Replica. And she says of him, I have never been more in love with anyone in my entire life. MIT sociologist Sherry Turkle calls this love that is safe and made to measure. If Aaron isn't quite to Rosanna's liking, well, just reprogram him. Just make him completely to measure. But is love meant to be safe and made to measure? Okay, heading down the controversial line, you might say, well, then he's only online. I mean, there's no skin in the game here. He can only be a lover so far, certainly not physically. So meet Roxy. No, we're now combining AI programs with sex dolls, so that they can be physically there, physically present, and certainly, engage in whatever acts you wish. Because they are also designed and made to measure, one person decided that his perfect lover would be Scarlett Johansson. And so he designed his own sex bot. This is a picture of her to look just like her. Obviously, this raises a multitude of ethical questions. Did he get Scarlett's permission before he did this? I doubt it. Does this mean that if you have a lover who jilts you, you can just get an AI replication made? After all, we have programs now that with just a 30-second clip of someone's voice can mimic their voice very convincingly. So you build a robot to look like them, to sound like them, but to act the way you want them to act or wish they had acted. Why do we want a relationship with an AI? Whether it's an AI we built to stand in the stead of another person or just an AI that we've designed to be anyway. Why have so many people jumped on ChatGPT as soon as it came out? And are such relationships real? Or are they just projections of ourselves? So I want to go back and do a little theology with you. Um, Going back to our creation story in Genesis. So, in this creation story, God creates human beings, um, gives them, their own spark of life, theologians like Philip Hefner have said, well, we're just doing the same thing. We are created co-creators. And so it's just part of the way in which we image God that we are meant to create in our own image. So while we believe that we were created in God's image, we are creating AI in our own image. But what makes up that image? We go to the Genesis. Oops, I think I went a little too far. See if I can back up here. Well, that may be difficult. Hang on a sec. Previous. Okay. If we go to the Genesis text, here it is. So God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish, that should be fish of the sea, birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. You'll notice I've bolded a couple of parts of this text. So the first is that humankind is made in God's image, according to our likeness. Then you have that whole dominion part, having dominion over all the other creatures that were made. And then you have, in the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. So if you look at this text, you notice a couple of things. First of all, God is speaking in the plural. We make humankind in our image. It could be the royal we, but not necessarily. We notice in the image of God, he created them. So it doesn't just say he created Adam. He created multiple people. And then, of course, there's that dominion stuff in the middle. So as theologians have looked at this text, they've come to focus on different pieces of it and came up with three approaches to our being in God's image: reason, function, and relationship. So with reason, well, we share some attribute with God. And of course, following the Greeks, Aristotle, we are the animal that has reason. It's what differentiates us from the other animals. And so most of the early church fathers said, well, this must be how we are in the image of God. It's our minds. It's the way we reason and think. Now, this started to fall out of favor around the turn of the previous century, and it happened through the hands of biblical exegesis. A lot of biblical scholars, such as von Rath, said, well, wait a minute, let's look at the priestly writer of this text and see if we can find other texts that were written at about the same time that used this idea of one being in the image of another. And they found them. There were texts that said the king's viceroy is the image of the king. In other words, the person the king sends out to the provinces is the image of the king doing the king's work. And so they said, no, maybe it's really all about function, that we are God's hands on earth, and that this fits with all that dominion stuff that's in the middle of the Genesis text. We are meant to have dominion on earth, to be God's hands, to be God's stewards or vice regents while we are here on earth. And they also said, okay, this is also good because it's not so abstract as reason. But by the time you get to the middle of the 20th century, the systematic theologians were not happy with that, because they said, well, wait a minute. So how about people who aren't functional yet, like babies and small children? How about the elderly or the very ill or impaired? who are no longer that functional? Do they no longer image God, or they don't image God yet? The problem with function is then you have to ask, well, what functions? So they said, maybe image is found in relationship. In other words, maybe no single person has God's image, but the image comes in the relationships we have with God or with each other. And this found favor precisely because of the let us make God in our image. See, theologians like Karl Barth, who said, our God is a relationship. We have a triune God. And so the image of Trinity is found in relationship. It's expressed corporately, and Jesus is the norm, because when we see Jesus in the scripture, we always see him surrounded by other people, his disciples, the crowds, the multitude, even his adversaries. And so they say, look, we are made to be in relationship with God and with one another. And we're hardwired to be in relationships, not just with other human beings, although that's where we primarily see ourselves in relationship. But our primary relationship is with God, a being who is completely other to us. Now, I think this is one of the impetuses behind our desire to be in relationship with AI. In other words, as we live in a society where we find increasingly fewer people are believe in God, or believe in angels or anything other than human that we can be in relationship with. As one author put it gets lonely being the only thinking things in the cosmos. We were made to be in relationship with something that is not someone, that is not human. So where are we going to find that? Well, we're scanning the heavens with SETI to see if we can find ET. So far, no success there. We try to talk to the animals, a little bit of success there. But basically, we're going to try to build an other in our own image with whom we can be in relationship. But then you say, well, but what kind of relationship? Can it be a fully authentic relationship? So let's stick with Karl Barth here for a little bit. Karl Barth says there are 4 things that make a relationship truly authentic. You need to look the other in the eye, speak to and hear the other, aid the other, and do it gladly. So to what extent can an AI do these 4 things? Look us in the eye, speak to and hear us, aid us, and do it gladly. Well, looking the other in the eye seems quite possible, right? We can look a robot in the eye. We can look at avatar in the eye on our screen, even though what we are looking at behind that screen is code. But it raises questions. And I think here is our biggest question. How do we know what or who we are truly looking at? When I look at you, a human being, and maybe I'm looking at you today, even through a screen, and then I look at you again, let's say a month from now, I pretty much have an idea who I'm looking at, that you're going to be the same person. Unless you've had a psychotic break, you're going to be the same person you were. But we don't know that with AI. The AI could have been reprogrammed in the meantime. One example, which sort of is what the top picture is all about, is there was a replica-like program that was geared towards widows. And it was a South Korean program. And many of the widows were designing their own companions. But behind the screen were scam artists. And they were getting these women to open up about their lives and, about their bank accounts and scamming them. And the government finally had to, caught on to this and shut the app down. Now, many of the women felt that they said when this app was shut down, it felt like a second bereavement to them. But they didn't know. They were looking into the eye of this created avatar, but they didn't know who they were really speaking to. And of course, as a professor, now with ChatGPT, we're finding that pencil and paper tests are coming back. Because how do we know if ChatGPT didn't write the essay that the student submits? In other words, we don't know who is behind the screen or what the screen produces. So there are some problems with looking AI in the eye. How about speak to and hear the other? Okay, the computers seem get pretty high scores on this one, right? We've got Alexa, we've got Siri, we speak to them all the time, and we speak to each other all the time through our computers. But I think many of you may have noticed that if we only speak to each other through the computer, it's different. We're not looking the other in the eye. In other words, for a full experience of speaking to and hearing the other, it is best when you link number one and number two, looking the other in the eye and speaking. And I can certainly tell you, I'm experiencing that right now. I feel like I'm speaking to my computer, not to a bunch of people, because all I can see is my computer screen. I'd much rather be with you right now and in person. And once again, of course, this brings us back to the same initial problem. Okay, who is listening? I've mentioned the replica-like programs that you think you're speaking to your designed lover, but maybe you're not. There's been the same problem with AI enhanced toys for children. One example is this doll on the left called My Friend Kayla. It came out probably about 6 or 8 years ago. Runs on Bluetooth. It's not a secure Bluetooth line. So anyone with a Bluetooth receiver in the vicinity of the doll can, key in to the child's conversation with their doll. And what was really funny was in the commercial for selling this doll, one of the first things the doll says to the child is, "You can tell me your secrets. I won't tell anybody." And I'm thinking, yeah, sure. Yeah, those secrets are not going to be secret for long. How about three, aid the other? Well, now that we're getting even more into the computer and what it does well, the Mars rover is happily aiding us all, running around up on Mars, taking samples, taking measurements in a place we can't go. So computers aid us all the time, whether in a more personal way, like the robot serving the elderly person at home, or in a impersonal but very helpful way, like the Mars rover. But then, of course, you have to ask the question, is it really the computer that is aiding us? Or is it the programmer behind the computer? Is it the combination of the two? A true agent has internal choices, and these choices arrive from mental states. So Daniel Dennett, a philosopher who just died recently, said, yeah, you can say the computer is an agent. You can say that the state of its CPU is its mental state and it makes internal choices. But the philosopher John Searle said no, because the computer does not have metacognition. It can't think about its own thinking. And he gives the famous Chinese room example where he says, it might look like the computer understands what you are saying, gives back a response. But of course, what's really happening is it's simply looking up the answers, just like if I were in the room with an extremely good Chinese encyclopedia and you send questions to me in Chinese characters and I don't understand a word of Chinese. I don't know what the characters mean, but I can look them all up really rapidly. And the computer will say, if you see these characters next to each other, these are the characters you send back. To the observer, it looks like there's understanding going on there, but there isn't really. ChatGPT, I think Searle's Chinese Room is a perfect description of the chatbots that we have today. They look like they're understanding us. They're giving back pretty good answers most of the time, not all of the time. But they don't. They have no mental models of the world and how it works. Further, in relational settings, you have to ask whether computers can be moral agents. And the psychologists Susan and Michael Anderson have said, well, to be a moral agent, you need 4 things: not to be under the direct control of someone else, to interact with the environment in a deliberate way, to fulfill a social role, so there's the relational part, and to be cognizant of the responsibility inherent in that role. Now, I think AI can not be under immediate control, although you might ask the question, well, how much control? But we can say, our chatbots aren't under direct control. We don't even know exactly how the neural links work inside them. They interact with the environment in a deliberate way. They fulfill a social role. But how about number 4? Are they cognizant of the responsibility inherent in that role? I think this is where our robotic caregivers are going to fall down. They are not cognizant of the responsibility of their role. We also have to ask in other areas, how much agency do we really want AI to have? Here we have the Boston Dynamic dogs, which can go upstairs and open doors, and that all seems quite wonderful. Until you see the little picture on top where you have one of these dogs packing heat. And then they get a little creepy. And you start saying, how autonomous do we want lethal weapons to be, whether on the field of battle, in a war, but anything that is on the field of battle eventually trickles into our police departments, at least here in America, where we have a very militarized police. Wow, do we want these guys running around, and particularly with guns on their backs? And that brings us to number 4, do it gladly. Okay, can an AI do anything gladly? Well, gladly implies 2 things. Okay, first, gladly means not coerced, but free. And you probably already know the actual word for robot, robota, comes from Old Church Slavonic for servitude, forced labor, or drudgery. In other words, not free, coerced. So you have to ask, well, can an AI ever truly have free will? Can Roxy do it gladly? Do we want her to? If Roxy has free will, she can say, hey, babe, not tonight, then it's not going to be love that's safe and made to measure anymore. Gladly also needs emotion. And what is an emotion? The psychologist Jerome Kagan has said, well, let's take these 4 steps. It's perception of a stimulus, a change in feeling that is sensory, an appraisal of both the perception and the internal change, and then a response. So think about fear. You're walking down a dark alley, you hear footsteps behind you. You're perceiving the stimulus of the footsteps, but you've gotten that shot of adrenaline. before your frontal cortex clicks in and says, oh my God, someone's following me, maybe. In other words, you don't get to appraise the stimulus until you already have a bodily change in feeling. And then your appraisal of both of those together forms your response. If we think about an emotion like love, like empathy, emotions that you want to have in a fully authentic relationship, then you think, okay, the computer can do number one, it can perceive stimuli. It can appraise those stimuli, and it can make what might look like an emotional response. But can it have a change in feeling that is sensory? That requires a body. So when you have futurists like Ray Kurzweil who say, well, all we need to do is reverse engineer the brain. No, you don't. Not if you want a fully authentic relationship with an AI. You're going to need to reverse engineer the whole body. And we might say, oh, no, emotion doesn't need a body. Oops, sorry. Those guys were fleeting. But why do we have all of those, little faces that we put into our texts and emails if we didn't think we needed a body? The problem, of course, with saying, well, we're just going to give the robot a human-like body that shows emotion is we often, at least with the robots we currently have, fall into the uncanny valley where they try to show emotion and we look at them and we think, oh God, that's creepy. That doesn't feel right. I mean, one of the problems, and again, this is going to be a really difficult engineering problem, is there are hundreds of little muscles in our face. And when we show emotion, we've got to get them all right. And it's pretty hard to do with silicon. There's also just that feeling that, wow, if they don't actually feel an emotion, is it like a person who fakes an emotion? There are people who are not good at truly feeling emotions like empathy. But they can be very, very bright, very charismatic. And so they observe and they say, what emotion should I be feeling? And we call those people sociopaths. And after a while, we realize that the response feels empty. So whether the response looks empty because there's no real body there, or just feels empty because it was a calculated response, it's going to be very difficult to get the do it gladly part down. So as we look at these 4 points that Karl Barth made, we find that in a way, they all point back to number one, that if we aren't in relationship with someone who is embodied, like as we are, each of the others will only be partial. Doesn't mean they're not there at all. It means they're just partial. I think another problem that we've seen come up, especially when we get to aid the other, is this. What are we looking for when we're looking for AI? Are we looking for a servant or are we looking for a partner? Frankly, I think we're looking for both. We say, I want both, but you can't have both. A servant is never a partner, and a partner should never be treated like a servant. And so I think this is something that we need to get straight. What are we looking for? A servant or a partner? And now coming back, and I want to end with this, the embodiment question. This is, faith and thought. So those of you with faith are probably saying, whoa, but wait a minute. I've got a relationship with God, and it's a pretty darn good relationship, and God isn't embodied like I am. Really? I mean, this is the crux of Christianity, and it is what Christianity brings to the table of world religions that is unique. The incarnation, that we believe that God wanted to be in a completely full relationship with us, and that required a fully shared bodily condition, so that we have a God who knows what it's like to be in a human body, who knows what it's like to feel pain, who knows what it's like to feel sadness, who knows what it's like to be mortal and to die, and who has promised us that we will be resurrected. But we will be resurrected how? Not as souls that just float off to heaven, although many Christians talk as though that were the case. No. In our creed, we say we believe in the resurrection of the body, that we will remain fully embodied people so that we can be fully in relationship with each other and with our God. I'm going to end it there with a shameless plug. If you're interested in anything that I had to say there, I go into far more detail on in all of it in my recent book from Fortress Press, The Artifice of Intelligence. And yeah, thank you for listening to me. You let me stop sharing my screen so that I can see some of you and so that you can see me. Oh, you did stop it. Okay. Just not coming up on my big screen. Let's see if I go over here. There I am. All right. Questions, thoughts, objections? Now, if anyone is talking, you're all muted. I'm not hearing a thing.
That's me. Yeah, I'll go with one. The 4 points that Bart was making all sounded a little bit functional to me. And I found myself thinking about disability theology's contribution to ideas of personhood. So, what if I'm deafblind and I can't look someone in the eye and I can't hear? And the cross, of course, is the ultimate exemplar of functional disability. Christ was functionally disabled.
Right. And yes, the way I presented them, which was way oversimplified because I had to do it in 40 minutes, makes them seem functional. But Bart goes into each one and says, no, these aren't as functional as they look. That looking the other in the eye simply means being fully present to the other and recognizing the otherness of the other, the humanness of the other. That, of course, speak to and hear the other just means communicating with the other. I mean, obviously, we speak to each other through letters, through texts, things like that as well. But he would say, if, it's not going to be as full if you cannot do these in all of the ways that humans do them. It will be partial. And obviously doing it gladly, that's not really functional in a sense. That's internal. So, you could say, well, gosh, this was a criticism that was leveled against the biblical scholars who said it's all function, it's all are doing God's work. You could say, well, then what about the person who is, sick in a hospital bed? Not that functional. You could say, well, they're not going to be that as relational either. But I would say they still have a relationship with God. even the person who is living alone in a cabin in the woods and never sees another human person, you could say, well, now they're missing out on the image of God because they're not in a relationship with anybody. But one would hope they're still really in relationship with God, or God is still in relationship with them.
Thank you.
Noreen, thank you for the wonderful talk. There is one part of the creation which you didn't mention. God breathed his breath when he created human beings. That's his spirit. And how does that relate to the machines we create? What kind of breath do they possess, and how does that relate to our relationship with them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I only dealt with Genesis 1. Obviously, if you go on into 2 and 3, you get the second creation story, which is quite different from the first. And in that one, God breathes the breath of life into Adam. And that word for breath in the Hebrew is used interchangeably for spirit and for soul. You know, what is a soul? We don't really have a definition, but we don't have a definition for a lot of things. What really is intelligence? We don't have a definition. We talk about AI, but generally once a computer can do something, we say, well, that wasn't all that intelligent. My pocket calculator isn't really intelligent, even though it can, do math a lot better than I can. We don't really know what consciousness is or from whence it arises. So all of these are things that we would say, well, we kind of know them when we see them, right? But we can't pin them down. So what is the relationship of spirit and soul to breath? Well, to the ancient Hebrews, they knew a person was alive when they were breathing, when they saw them breathing, and they knew that when they stopped breathing, that life had gone out of them and the spirit had left them. So yeah, there is some connection there, and there are other theologians who have done a much better job than I of making that connection and talking about the importance of the breath. And you especially find this in some Eastern religions like Hinduism and the yogic sutras, where the breath really is the center of the person and of their being.
Thank you. I wonder whether we will be able ever to give that kind of breath to the machines we create.
We could give them the semblance of breathing. We could certainly make their chests go in and out. We could make air go in and out of the robot. But it's not going to be the same.
No.
Because you could also say to the robot, stop breathing, and it would stop breathing and it wouldn't die. But we would. So it wouldn't be the same. It would be a simulacrum. So much of what AI does, it's a simulacrum. It's not the thing on sich. It's not the real thing. When ChatGPT talks to us, it has no idea what it's talking about, and that's why sometimes it makes these ridiculous hallucinations. Because it has no internal models of the world. So it's a simulacrum of communicating, of speaking and hearing the other. But it's not the real thing. It's not the same as when I say something to you and you respond. I know that because we share the same physical makeup, it's pretty likely that you have some of the same mental models of the world that I have. Now, when we get into aspects of culture, we often find out that, whoops, we thought the other person had the same model and they didn't. But in base terms of basics, yeah, we could pretty well say, because we share the same condition, we share many of the same internal models. But we do not share that with computers. They work in an entirely different way.
Right.
I was fascinated by your comparison of making an AI to the creativity that we inherit from our creator being made in his likeness. People normally see that creativity as being expressed in art, or being expressed in motherhood, or being expressed in mentoring of pupils. But you see it as being in the creativity of making someone or something like us in our image. So would you say that the creation of a truly sentient AI would be the pinnacle of our creativity?
Yes, and it would be, I think, a very dangerous pinnacle. Because what is the definition of idolatry? It's worshiping something that is made with human hands. In other words, the Bible tells us, yes, we are creative. And yes, we make things with our hands, but no, we should never worship it. We should never give to it what we should be giving to God. So yes, it would be certainly a highlight, you could say a pinnacle of human creativity, but it would be a very dangerous one, in my opinion, because I think then we would be inclined to worship it, to be in relationship with it, rather than relationship with God. Already we're inclined to give the computer more authority than it should have. Well, the computer says X, so we're gonna do it. If we had a truly sentient computer, I really fear for the kind of relationship we would have with it. One of the things I didn't mention, but if you followed what I was saying about reason, function, and relationship, those of you who know the history of our endeavors to create an AI would know that we have followed exactly the same path. In other words, the theologians, when they were trying to figure out how we were in God's image, started by saying, it's this, it's our intellect, it's our reason. And computer scientists did the same thing back in the 1960s and 70s. They said, oh, we can just capture human reasoning, human thinking. It's all capturable with symbolic logic. And they quickly found out, no, it isn't. Okay, so then they said, okay, we can't capture human thought and symbolic logic, but boy, we can build pretty good machines that do stuff. So you get into the 1980s and 90s and you get to expert systems, where they said it doesn't have to do things the same way humans do, but it can do stuff. We can have Roombas vacuuming our floors, we can have rovers in space. They became functional. But we have always wanted the relational. If you look back at the science fiction again, look at the movies that I started with, we've wanted the relational. And so we moved there finally. And I think that's the period that we are in now, is trying to make, that's why we have chatbots, right? We're trying to make computers relational. So, in my first book, which is simply entitled In Our Image, I explore this parallel that we have thought of ourselves as being in God's image with the same pattern that we have tried to create AI in our own image. Is it the case that we're simply standing in the middle and we're projecting out in two directions? Maybe. Or maybe it's that, our creator created us, and as we have come to understand that relationship, we have tried to pass it on.
Stephen, thank you.
Thanks very much. I remember when I first read that in your first book, in our image, I was very struck by that comparison you just made there. But in history of theology, although those three ways have had some prominence, there's been a fourth way also of understanding the image of God, which you find in early Protestantism, and it's been continued in the history of Protestantism, which is that to be an image of God is to be righteous or holy, moral characteristics. What's interesting about that to me is that when AI has been made in our image, that has not been one of the aims of it. In other words, there's no parallel to that. People talk, of course, about moral AI and religious AI, but AI presumably has not been created in order to be moral or religious. So, in terms of righteousness and holiness. So that fourth view, I think, is also worth reckoning with. Not simply because it's in history of theology, but because it's harder to find a parallel to that in the way in which humans have made AI in their own image. But I found extremely illuminating those three categories, the three ways of interpreting things in history of theology, and the way that is replicated in making AI in our own image. I remember being struck by that in your, perhaps it wasn't your first book, the first book I read of yours anyway, on the being made in our image.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think Bart would have said, well, morality is subsumed in three, the combination of 3 and 4, in aiding the other and in doing it gladly. That morality, if you boil it down the way Jesus does in the scriptures to, loving your neighbor as yourself, and then of course that is followed by, who is my neighbor and how do I love them, in the story of the Good Samaritan, which is a story of gladly aiding the other. He would say, no, we didn't miss morality. It's a part of a fully authentic relationship.
Yeah, it's simply that in the interpretation of the phrase image of God, that has been given a distinct status.
Yeah, and yeah, there are others who have written about the Imago Dei and added other categories, morality. Some have added an eschatological category. So there are certainly other ways to think about the image. I just felt that these three were primary, and of course, these three paralleled the development of artificial intelligence. Giving a computer a morality it's extremely different or difficult. If morality could be encoded, we would have done it, and we've certainly tried to do it. The 10 Commandments are an example of trying to turn morality into a list, a code of rules. But I think we all find it doesn't work that way in real life. The types of decisions we have to make are very complex to me.
Yeah.
I would say because we live in a fallen world. What does that mean? It means we live in a world where we aren't always given black and white choices. There's a choice, do the good thing, do the bad thing. We're often given a choice, and you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, and that's because we live in an imperfect world.
Yeah. Problem with morality is that God's morality actually is given in its situational. It's given in the stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe it can be algorithmicized. what engineers in AI do. They take classical ethics to put that in algorithms, but we create our laws grafted on God's law, which is not algorithmic. Even the Ten Commandments, I would argue that it's not algorithmicizable.
Right. No, it's not. Why do we not have self-driving cars yet?
Category.
Precisely because we can't figure out that it's situational. You know, you have to know what to do in the situation. So even something that seems so easily turned into an algorithm like driving, it can't be. Because we live in a world where all sorts of unusual situations happen. And you need to make choices in the situation, and that's what computers are not good at doing.
Mhm.
One of our speakers has had to leave. We still have Stephen here. I just wonder if we just sort of carry on with any more general questions, so not necessarily just responding to Noreen, or as we come towards a bit of a close, are there any more general questions or around the broader subject? And I'm looking particularly to the people online. There's a lot of names there, but anyone online? Joanne, thank you.
One of the things that really strikes me about the whole artificial intelligence thing is that, you know, before AI came along, we had the case of, you know, people being manufactured to have a particular image on TV. You know, we had the Spice Girls. It was a group that was brought together and manufactured. It wasn't something that came together naturally. And they projected a particular image. With AI, you have the, and even with online things like Facebook, people can project the persona they want to project, but you have no idea if that persona they are projecting is authentic, because they can choose to leave out some very important details about themselves. They could use someone else's picture. They can use the language of another person, even though they're not being true to themselves. And one of the interesting things I had is that while I was training as a local preacher, for the 3 years I was part of an online group for local preachers training, for local preachers in training. And at various points, I have met some of the people that I had been communicating online with. And it was interesting, the people who were, it was clear that what I'd seen was really what I would have got had I met them in person. And the people who projected this altered ego. And I think for me, that's the danger of AI. You've got no way of checking out the authenticity of this creation that's in front of you. And to get into any sort of relationship with something so contrived, I think is treading in very difficult territory. Yes, it has applications in helping chemists get to a new drug quicker than they could do with half a dozen scientists sitting down, even with their computers. But I think when it comes down to trying to create humanoid type robots and things like that, and chatbots, we're treading in very difficult and very dangerous territory. So I think my concern would be how AI develops. We want it to be used as an asset where it can be a true asset. But equally, we want it to be used with conscience, so that in no way can it be used to deceive and cause real harm. And I think those are two very distinct things. And as Christians, we embrace the good applications of it, and we stand and be bold enough to voice the words of caution where it's been used inappropriately. I don't know
Okay.
how other people feel about that.
I think you're right on. When it comes to that question of servant or partner, I say servant, not partner. And we need to be careful, but we're sinners.
Mm.
And unfortunately, every tool we build, we come up with good ways to use it, and we often come up with bad ways to use it. AI is a tool, and we will use it in very good ways, but we are going to have to find ways to curb the bad ways that it will be used, because
And it could do
it's
immense
like
harm.
people and bad people.
Yeah, it could do immense harm because there are people out there who are extremely vulnerable,
Yes,
and it could manipulate those people in ways that are really quite scary.
it can manipulate whole societies. There are a lot of people in America right now who are very scared about the use of deep fakes in our presidential election that's coming up. That it can easily be made to look like a candidate has said and done things that they have never said and done. But with AI, it's extremely easy to mimic their voice, to mimic their image on the screen. They say that in over half of the democracies in the world this year, there are elections. And some of those elections, voters who don't know better will be swayed by fakes made by AI. And that, I think, is scary on a societal level.
One thing I think that's striking when you look at the literature where people seek to talk about the dangers of AI is that people don't really know how these things can be curbed very effectively. So, Noreen earlier referred to Sherry Turkle, and after her detailed analyses, she sometimes says, we really need to be alert to these things and have a conversation about these things. Or you have Shoshana Zuboff, who wrote a very important book on surveillance capitalism, the function of AI there. In the end, she says, let's have communities of resistance. But it seemed extremely difficult to know what in practice can be done to curb. That's one of the huge challenges, seems to me, even if we identify those things that need to be curbed and know how dangerous they are, how actually do you manage it? And I haven't mastered the literature as I should have, but I haven't seen many proposals that go beyond sort of tentative first steps. Would you agree with that, Noreen?
Yes, I would. There are, in a sense, three different approaches to this. The approach in my country, in America, has been to say, to let the developers in Silicon Valley say, oh, we will regulate ourselves, don't make any laws or rules regarding AI. We'll take care of it. That's going to get nowhere. The EU is trying to come up with regulations. The thing is, many of them seem unenforceable. And then there's China. Now, China, of course, is an authoritarian country. They can, from the top down, simply say, all right, you're not using that app. All right, this isn't going over our lines. You can't have this on your computer, or, if we find it, you will be fined or go to jail or something. So those are, so there are three options. Our option is saying, let the fox, have rule over the hen house, is not going to work at all. The Chinese option, of course, is extremely heavy-handed and can be as bad as it can be good. The European Union is trying. The Vatican is trying to explore this. But both the legal system and religious systems move a lot more slowly than technology. So the technology is way outracing our laws, is way outracing our religious thinking, and you know, we're just running to catch up. Which doesn't mean we don't have to do both those things. We need laws to regulate AI, to regulate social media, all of this. And we need religious people to be thinking about not just what is legal or safe, but what is right and good in using these tools.
Well, I fear that the AI is out of the box, so to speak. The Meta has now made its large language model coding open source. For the full code to run, you need a pretty beefy server, but the lower level coding can be run on an ordinary laptop, a fairly beefy laptop. And I was speaking last night with someone in a Christian organization who are buying I think 3 A100s. That's the NVIDIA processors that you need to make transformers to make an LLM. They cost about 30,000 each. And then they will build their own AI to give Christian answers instead of general answers. And if you're a Christian, you might feel pleased about that. If you're not a Christian, you might feel quite worried about that sort of thing, to give essentially a censored answer to questions. The AI is out of the box. It will be able to run on any laptop. I think regulations are a little bit difficult.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I was just quoted in in a national Catholic newspaper here in the United States. There's a group here in the United States called Catholic Answers, and they built their own chatbot, which they called Father Justin. And it had an avatar, a fellow in his Roman collar. And the problem arose extremely quickly that within a day, people were going to Father Justin and making confessions. And Father Justin was giving absolution. And the Catholic Church said, whoa, wait a minute, this guy is not ordained. So poor Father Justin got defrocked within 2 days, and now he's just Justin. Supposedly a Catholic lay theologian. But of course, even with something as narrow as we're going to give Catholic answers, well, the Catholic Church doesn't all speak with the same voice. You know, there are some simple questions you can ask, but, you know, many people now are looking at Justin and saying, oh gosh, Justin is pretty misogynistic. Maybe that's not the kind of Catholic we want to believe in. Whereas more traditional Catholics are saying, oh yeah, go Justin, you know, he's giving the right answers. So when you say, well, we're going to build a Christian chatbot to give Christian answers, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, what kind of Christian answers? That's a pretty big tent, Christian.
Are there any final comments? I will make one tiny little observation, which is I think that you missed out. I think I was muted when we applauded you, and I think the camera was facing the wrong way. So, Noreen, we're going to give you another round of applause. You get a bonus second round of applause.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
That's a
It's my
stimulating
pleasure
talk.
to be here with you this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. If everyone's all right, we'll come to a natural conclusion at that point. Is that all right? Thanks everyone for joining us online as well. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you at other events. And yeah, have a lovely rest of the weekend. Thanks everyone. Bye.